The elevator doors opened on the executive floor of Harlow Medical Technologies, and 6-year-old Emma Brooks knew immediately she'd made a mistake. She wasn't supposed to be here. The carpet was too white, the walls too clean, the silence too heavy. She just wanted to see where Daddy worked during the day, why he came home so tired, smelling like chemicals and defeat. But now a woman in a black suit was walking toward her, heels clicking like a countdown, and Emma's heart hammered in her small chest. The woman's voice was ice. "Who let you in here?" Before Emma could answer, her father appeared, out of breath, his janitor's uniform still damp from mopping the third-floor hallway. "I'm sorry, ma'am. She's mine. She won't—" The woman's eyes cut to him, sharp enough to draw blood. "She's yours?" And then came the words that would shatter everything. Words that would echo in Emma's nightmares and ultimately expose a secret her father had buried so deep he'd almost forgotten who he used to be. But in 72 hours, that secret would save a life, destroy a career, and prove that some scars don't just mark where you've been. They reveal who you've always been. Henry Brooks hadn't learned to be invisible. He had chosen it. This job wasn't a last resort. It was a sentence. The uniform, faded blue, smelling of bleach and quiet failure, was his daily reminder. He didn't work at Harlow Medical Technologies despite its connection to his past. He worked here because of it. He wasn't hiding from the memory of what happened. He was serving time at the scene of his greatest failure, forced to walk the halls of a world he had lost the right to be a part of. No one looked at janitors. They looked through them, past them. And for Henry, that wasn't a need. It was his punishment. He'd picked up Emma from Lincoln Elementary at 3:15, same as every day. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, always gave him a sympathetic smile that made his stomach tighten. The other parents barely acknowledged him. Their kids wore new shoes and carried lunchboxes with cartoon characters. Emma's shoes were from Goodwill, her lunchbox a plain metal tin that had belonged to her mother. "Daddy," Emma had said in the car, her voice small, "can I see where you work today?" Henry's hands had tightened on the steering wheel. "Baby, you know the rules. You stay in the break room and do your homework. But I finished my homework in class, and I drew you a picture. I want to show you where you keep it." He should have said no. He should have explained again that the executive floors were off limits, that he could lose his job if she wandered. But she'd looked at him with those eyes, her mother's eyes, and he'd felt his resolve crack. "Okay, but you stay close to me, and if anyone asks, you tell them you're leaving right away." She'd nodded, solemn as a judge. Now, standing in front of Natalie Harlow, Henry wished he'd been stronger. Natalie was 33 but looked older in the harsh fluorescent light. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. Her suit was probably worth more than Henry made in a month. She radiated control, the kind that came from fear dressed up as authority. "This is a restricted floor," Natalie said. Her voice carried, pulling the attention of executives passing by. A small crowd began to form, sensing drama. "Do you have any idea how many confidentiality agreements we have in place?" "I understand, ma'am. It won't happen again." "You understand." Natalie's laugh was sharp. "Do you?" "Because I'm looking at a janitor who can't even supervise his own child." Emma's hand found Henry's. Her fingers were cold. "Please," Henry said quietly. "She's 6. She just wanted to see—" "To see what?" "The world she'll never be part of." Natalie's gaze dropped to Emma. The little girl had her notebook clutched in her other hand, the one where she drew hearts and dreamed of being a doctor. "Sweetheart, let me give you some advice. Your father cleans up after important people. That's all he'll ever do. If you want a different life, you'll need to work harder than he did." The words landed like punches. Henry felt Emma's hand squeeze his, felt her small body press against his leg. "She's 6, Henry repeated. His voice was still quiet, but something in it made Natalie's eyes narrow. "Then teach her early." "The world doesn't care about excuses." Natalie's voice rose, her face flushing. "Do you think I got where I am by making excuses?" By letting my father make things easy. I earned this position. And people like you, she gestured at his uniform, at his daughter, at everything they represented. People like you will always be on the outside looking in because you're content with mediocrity. An older man in a white coat had stopped at the edge of the crowd. Dr. Paul Chen, head of cardiac research. His eyes were on Henry's face, studying him with an intensity that made Henry's chest tighten. I think that's enough, Natalie, Paul said. Natalie turned, her expression flashing irritation before smoothing into professional courtesy. Dr. Chen, I'm simply maintaining protocol. Protocol doesn't require cruelty. The air went still. Natalie's jaw set. For a moment, Henry thought she might escalate, but she simply nodded once, sharp as a blade. Get her out of here, she said to Henry. Then she walked away, heels clicking against the white carpet like punctuation marks. The crowd dispersed. Paul Chen lingered, still watching Henry with that strange, searching look. Henry didn't meet his eyes. He couldn't afford questions. Come on, Emma, he said softly. In the elevator, Emma was quiet. When they reached the basement level where Henry kept his supplies, she finally spoke. Daddy, why did she say those things? Henry knelt down, eye level with his daughter. Her face was blotchy from holding back tears. Sometimes people are scared, and scared people say mean things to make themselves feel bigger. What's she scared of? I don't know, baby. But it's not about you, and it's not about me. It's about her. Emma nodded, processing this with the seriousness of a much older child. I don't like her. You don't have to like her. But we don't hate her either, okay? We just feel sorry for people who forgot how to be kind. Did Mommy teach you that? Henry's throat closed. Yeah, baby. She did. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked in a smaller voice, Did Mommy clean floors too? The question hit Henry like a physical blow. No, baby. Mommy was a nurse. She helped people in the hospital. Was she important? She was the most important person in the world. More important than that lady? Henry pulled Emma into a hug. More important than everyone. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen of their small apartment, staring at the photograph on the refrigerator. Grace, smiling, her scrubs visible under her jacket. Emma cradled in her arms. The photo was 7 years old. Emma had been 6 months old. Grace had been dead for 3 days when Henry finally came home from the hospital to take it. He didn't think about that night often. Couldn't afford to, but Natalie's words had cracked something open. Your father will only ever clean up after important people. He'll never be one. Henry had been important once. Dr. Henry Brooks, cardiac surgery fellow, youngest in his program at Boston Memorial. Grace used to tease him about his God complex, the way surgeons got when they held a beating heart in their hands. She'd been right. He had felt like God in the OR, omnipotent, essential, untouchable. Then he'd learned how quickly God could fall. The scar on his chest ached, the way it did sometimes when the weather changed or when memories pressed too close. He pulled his shirt collar aside and looked at it in the dim light from the stove. Jagged, puckered, running from his sternum to his left shoulder. A bullet had done that. A 9mm round that should have killed him but somehow threaded between his ribs, missed his heart by centimeters, and lodged in his shoulder blade. The trauma surgeon who'd operated on him, Paul Chen, though Henry hadn't known his name then, had called it a miracle. Henry called it a curse, because he'd survived, and Grace hadn't. He remembered the chaos of that night in fragments. The gunman storming the ER, screaming about the doctor who'd let his mother die. Henry in the OR, hands inside Richard Harlow's chest, the businessman's heart exposed and failing. The code blue alarm. The sound of gunshots. Grace's voice on the intercom. Active shooter, OR wing, all personnel evacuate. Then silence. Henry had been 3 knuckles deep in a coronary bypass. If he stopped, Richard Harlow would die. If he didn't stop, Grace might. He'd kept operating. Steady hands, steady voice. Talking the nurses through their panic while his own heart tried to hammer out of his chest. 20 minutes later, he'd closed Richard's chest. The man's heart was beating, strong and regular. Henry had saved his life. Then he'd run into the hallway and found Grace on the floor, blood pooling beneath her, and his world had ended. The next morning, Henry arrived at Harlow Medical Technologies at 5 a.m., same as always. The building was quiet at this hour, just security guards and the night shift researchers burning through deadlines. He liked the quiet, liked the way his footsteps echoed in empty hallways, the smell of industrial cleaner, the simple rhythm of his work. He was mopping the third-floor research wing when he heard voices. 2 engineers speaking in urgent whispers near the prototype lab. "The stress test results don't make sense," one said. Mark Chen, no relation to Paul, young guy, maybe 28, with thick glasses and perpetual coffee stains on his lab coat. "The valve shows perfect function at rest, but look at these simulations. Mark, it's fine. The FDA review is next week. We don't have time to redesign. But if there's a flaw, there's no flaw. The math is solid. You're just nervous." "I'm not nervous. I'm thorough. And these numbers indicate that under sustained high cardiac stress, like a myocardial infarction or extreme physical exertion, the leaflets don't close properly. We're talking about potential retrograde flow, ventricular failure." "You're catastrophizing. Every valve has theoretical failure points. This isn't theoretical. This is predictive modeling based on—" "Mark." The other engineer's voice hardened. "Drop it. Natalie has staked her entire reputation on this device. The board is waiting for any excuse to push her out. If we delay now, if we admit there might be a problem, the whole project collapses, and we all lose our jobs." Silence. Then Mark's defeated voice. "Fine. I'll adjust the report parameters." "Good man." Henry kept mopping, head down, but his mind was racing. Valve, stress tests. He'd heard whispers about the Harlow 7, the new artificial heart valve that was supposed to be revolutionary. Natalie had bet the company's future on it. And if what Mark just described was accurate, patients would die. The engineers moved away, still arguing in lower voices. Henry waited until they were gone, then glanced at the lab door. It was propped open slightly. Inside, he could see monitors displaying what looked like pressure readings and flow dynamics. He shouldn't look. He should finish mopping and move on. But something pulled him forward. Old instincts, maybe. Or guilt for all the patients he'd never treat again. He slipped inside. The monitors showed simulation results. A 3D model of the Harlow 7 valve functioning inside a digital heart. At rest, it looked perfect. Pressure gradients were normal. Flow was laminar and efficient. But there was another file open on the adjacent screen, labeled High Stress Simulation Confidential. Henry's hand moved before he could stop himself, clicking the file open. The valve's behavior changed dramatically under increased cardiac load. The leaflets, which should have closed tightly with each heartbeat, showed incomplete coaptation at peak stress. Blood flow became turbulent, creating dangerous pressure differentials. In a real patient, during a heart attack or extreme exertion, this valve would fail. Not immediately, but eventually, and catastrophically. Henry had seen this exact failure pattern before, 7 years ago, working on an early-generation artificial valve at Boston Memorial. They'd caught the flaw 3 days before scheduled human trials. A test patient, a pig with induced heart failure, had died when the valve failed during simulated cardiac stress. He printed the simulation data. His hands were shaking. He didn't know what he'd do with it, but he couldn't just walk away. People would die, mothers, fathers, children, people like Grace, who deserved better. A sound at the door made him freeze. He turned to see a young woman in a white coat standing in the entrance, her eyes wide. Dr. Susan Martinez, junior researcher. Henry recognized her from the break room. "What are you doing in here?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just confused. Henry's mind raced. "I'm sorry." The door was open. "I was just looking at confidential valve simulations." Susan stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "That's a fireable offense." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll go." "Wait." Susan moved closer, looking at the screen. Her face went pale. "You opened the stress simulation file." "I didn't mean to." "No, I mean—" She turned to him, really looking at him for the first time. "Do you understand what you're looking at?" Henry hesitated. This was the moment. He could lie, play dumb, protect his invisibility. Or he could tell the truth. "The valve will fail under high cardiac stress," he said quietly. "The leaflet coaptation is insufficient at peak systolic pressure. In a real patient, this would cause regurgitant flow, increased ventricular workload, and eventual cardiac failure." Susan's mouth opened. "How?" "Janitors don't know those terms." "I read a lot. No one reads enough to understand advanced valve mechanics and cardiac physiology like that." She studied his face, her scientific mind clearly working through a puzzle. "Who are you?" "I'm nobody." "That's not true." "You're someone who understands cardiac surgery, someone who—" She stopped, her eyes widening. "You're medical, aren't you?" "You were a doctor." Henry didn't answer. "Why are you working as a janitor if you have medical training?" "Because I can't be a doctor anymore." The words hung between them. Susan's expression softened. "I'm going to report this to Dr. Chen," she said finally. Henry's stomach dropped. "Please don't. I need this job. My daughter—" "I'm not going to get you fired. I'm going to tell him about the valve. Someone needs to. And if you understand what you're looking at, then you know people will die if this device goes to market with this flaw." She was right. Henry knew she was right. "Will you tell him it was me?" Susan considered this. "No. I'll say I found the data myself during a routine review. But you should talk to him. Eventually. Whatever happened to you, whoever you were, you could help. We need people who actually understand this stuff and care about patients over profits." She left, taking the printed simulation data with her. Henry stood alone in the lab, his heart pounding, wondering if he just made everything better or worse. Natalie Harlow sat in her father's office, her office now, though she still thought of it as his, and stared at the empty chair across the desk. Richard Harlow had collapsed in that chair 6 months ago. Massive stroke. The doctors said he'd been under enormous stress, that his blood pressure had been dangerously high for months. They said he'd ignored the warning signs, pushed himself too hard, refused to slow down. They said a lot of things, but none of it brought him back. Richard was alive, technically. He lay in a private room in the company's medical facility, surrounded by machines that breathed for him, fed him, kept his blood flowing. The doctors said he could wake up any day. Or never. There was no way to know. Natalie visited every morning before work, sitting beside his bed, updating him on company business like he could hear her. Maybe he could. The doctors said consciousness was complicated, that coma patients sometimes retained awareness. "The FDA approval is next week," she told him now, holding his limp hand. "The Harlow 7 is going to save us, Dad. Just like you said it would. The board members who doubted me, who said I was too young, too inexperienced, they're all going to see. I'm going to prove I'm worthy of your trust." Richard's face was slack, his breathing assisted by the ventilator. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, the sound Natalie heard in her dreams. "I know you worried about me taking over," she continued. Her voice cracked. "I know you wanted me to be ready. And I wasn't. I'm still not. But I'm trying, Dad. I'm trying so hard." She squeezed his hand, searching for any response. There was none. There never was. A knock on the doorframe made her turn. Dr. Paul Chen stood there, his expression grave in a way that made her chest tighten. "Natalie, we need to talk about your father's condition." Her stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "His brain activity has decreased significantly over the past 72 hours. We're seeing signs of increased intracranial pressure. If it continues, we may need to consider more aggressive intervention." What kind of intervention? Paul hesitated. There's a procedure, shunt placement to relieve the pressure, but given his overall fragility and the cardiac damage from the stroke, it's extremely high risk. His heart is barely functioning as it is. How high risk? 30 to 40% mortality rate during the procedure itself, and even if he survives the operation, there's no guarantee he'll wake up. Natalie felt the floor tilt. And if we don't do the procedure, he'll continue to decline. Brain damage will become irreversible. We might lose him anyway, just more slowly. How long do I have to decide? A few days, maybe a week. But Natalie, Paul's voice softened. There's another issue. The stroke damaged his heart significantly. Even if we relieve the brain pressure, his cardiac function is severely compromised. He would need a valve replacement to have any real chance of recovery. So we do the valve replacement. It's not that simple. His heart is too weak for surgery. The stress would likely kill him. We'd need to stabilize him first, but we can't stabilize him without relieving the brain pressure, and we can't do that without risking his heart failure. It's a catch-22. Natalie stared at her father's face, feeling helpless in a way she'd never allowed herself to feel before. There has to be something we can do. I'm consulting with specialists, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that... Paul couldn't finish the sentence. Natalie nodded, unable to speak. Paul left quietly. Alone again, Natalie looked at her father and felt something break inside her chest. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "Please, I don't know how to do this without you." But the machines just beeped their indifferent rhythm, and her father's hand remained limp in hers. Emma Brooks sat in the corner of the break room the next afternoon, drawing in her notebook. She was sketching a heart, not a Valentine's heart, but the real kind, with chambers and valves and arteries. She'd found a medical textbook at a used bookstore downtown, and her father had bought it for her despite the price making him wince. "That's very detailed," a voice said. Emma looked up. Dr. Susan Martinez stood there, holding a coffee cup, her white lab coat slightly wrinkled from a long shift. "I'm practicing," Emma said. "I want to be a doctor." Susan smiled, sitting down in the chair across from her. "That's wonderful." "What kind of doctor?" "A heart doctor, like my—" Emma stopped. "Daddy said not to talk about Mommy at work, said it made people ask too many questions." "Like your what?" "Like the ones in my book," Emma finished, holding up the textbook. Susan leaned forward, looking at the book's cover. "This is pretty advanced for a 6-year-old. I'm almost 7, and Daddy says I'm smart. Your daddy is the janitor, right?" "Henry?" Emma nodded, suddenly wary. Adults who asked about Daddy usually led to uncomfortable conversations. But Susan's voice was gentle. "He must be very proud of you." "He is. He says I can be anything I want." "That's because he's right. You seem very interested in hearts." "Why hearts specifically?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Because they're important. And because if someone's heart stops working, they die. And I don't want people to die." Something in Susan's expression shifted. "Did someone you know die?" Emma's pencil stilled on the page. "My mommy, when I was a baby." "I'm so sorry." "Daddy says she was brave, that she helped people even when it was scary." "What did she do?" "She was a nurse, at a hospital." Emma looked back at her drawing. "Daddy worked there too." Susan went very still. "Your father worked at a hospital?" Emma nodded, not noticing the change in Susan's tone. "A long time ago, before Mommy died. But he doesn't talk about it much. It makes him sad." "What did he do at the hospital?" Emma shrugged. "I don't know. He just says he used to help people." Susan was quiet for a long moment, her coffee forgotten. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully casual. "Your daddy seems like a very smart man." "He is. He knows everything about hearts. Sometimes I ask him questions from my book, and he always knows the answers. He says—" Emma stopped, remembering her father's warning about talking too much. "He says what?" "Nothing. I'm not supposed to talk about it." Susan didn't press. She just smiled, squeezed Emma's shoulder gently, and stood up. "Keep drawing, sweetheart. You're going to be an amazing doctor someday." After Susan left, Emma returned to her sketch. But she felt uneasy, like she'd said something wrong, something that would lead to the questions Daddy always tried to avoid. She hoped she hadn't messed up. Dr. Paul Chen found Susan Martinez in her office an hour later, staring at her computer screen with an intensity that immediately concerned him. "Susan, everything all right?" She turned, and he saw the conflict in her face. "Paul, can I ask you something confidential?" "Of course." "The janitor, Henry Brooks. Do you know anything about his background?" Paul's expression shifted, became guarded. "Why do you ask?" "Because his daughter just told me he used to work at a hospital before his wife died. And because I caught him in the prototype lab yesterday, looking at the Harlow 7 stress simulations. And Paul," she turned her screen toward him. He understood them, not just casually. He used technical terminology that no layperson would know. He described the valve failure mechanism with the precision of a cardiac surgeon. Paul was silent. "You know something," Susan said. "Don't you?" Paul closed the office door and sat down heavily. "I've suspected for a few weeks. The way he moves, the way he looks at medical equipment, and that scar on his chest. I saw it once when his shirt collar shifted. It's a bullet wound. Clean entry, complex trajectory. The kind of wound you see in trauma surgery." "You think he was shot?" "I know he was, because I remember the case. 7 years ago, Boston Memorial. There was a shooting in the ER, an active shooter targeting doctors. A cardiac fellow was operating on a VIP patient when it happened. He finished the surgery despite the chaos, then went to find his wife. She was a nurse. She'd been killed trying to stop the shooter. He was shot trying to reach her." Susan's hand went to her mouth. "The surgeon survived, barely. I was the trauma attending who operated on him. The bullet missed his heart by millimeters. We called it a miracle." Paul's voice was heavy with memory. "But after he recovered, he had a breakdown. PTSD, depression, probably survivor's guilt. He walked away from medicine. The hospital officially listed him as having resigned due to medical inability to perform duties. He disappeared completely." "What was his name?" "Dr. Henry Brooks." The name hung in the air between them. "The VIP patient," Susan said slowly. "The one he was operating on when his wife was killed." "Who was it?" Paul met her eyes. "Richard Harlow." Susan sat back, her mind reeling. "So Henry Brooks, our janitor, is the surgeon who saved Natalie's father. And now he's here, mopping floors, while Richard is dying and Natalie doesn't even know? I've been trying to confirm it, but Henry keeps to himself. And if I'm wrong, if I confront him based on a theory, you're not wrong. I've seen how he looks at the equipment, how he talks about cardiac mechanics. Paul, he knew immediately that the Harlow 7 has a critical flaw. He understood it faster than our entire engineering team." Paul rubbed his face tiredly. "What do you want me to do?" "Talk to him. Because that valve is going to demonstration in 5 days, and if there's really a problem, we need someone who can explain it in terms the FDA will understand. Someone with clinical credibility. He doesn't have a license anymore. He has knowledge, and right now, that's more valuable." Paul nodded slowly. "I'll talk to him. But Susan, if this is really Henry Brooks, he's been hiding for a reason. We need to be careful. People's lives are on the line. His life is on the line too, the one he's built with his daughter. If we expose him before he's ready, then we do it gently," Susan said. "But we do it." Henry was cleaning the executive restroom that evening when Paul Chen found him. The older doctor stood in the doorway, watching Henry scrub the sinks with methodical precision. "Henry, can we talk?" Henry's hand stilled. He didn't turn around. "About what, Dr. Chen?" "About the Harlow 7, about the stress simulations, about who you are." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Henry set down his cleaning supplies and faced Paul. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And I think you know that I know." Paul's voice was gentle, non-threatening. "I've been in medicine for 40 years, Henry. I remember the shooting at Boston Memorial. I remember operating on a young cardiac fellow who took a bullet trying to reach his wife. I remember how that bullet should have killed him, but somehow threaded through his ribs and missed every vital structure." Henry's face had gone pale. "I remember Dr. Henry Brooks," Paul continued, "one of the most talented surgeons I'd ever seen. And I remember that he disappeared after his wife's death, and no one could find him. The hospital said he'd had a breakdown, that he couldn't operate anymore. He couldn't." Henry's voice was barely audible, but he could read valve simulations. He could understand cardiac mechanics. He could see a flaw that our entire engineering team missed. "Susan told you. She's worried about patients. So am I. And Henry," Paul stepped closer, "I'm worried about you." "Don't be. I'm fine. You're mopping floors in a building where you once would have been running the cardiac unit. You're hiding who you are. You're watching people make mistakes that could kill patients, and you're staying silent because you're afraid of being seen. That's not fine." Henry's jaw tightened. "I have a daughter to support. I can't afford to be anything other than invisible. What if invisibility costs lives? What if visibility costs me my daughter? I lost my medical license, Dr. Chen. I lost my wife. I lost everything that mattered except Emma. And if I start making waves, if people start asking questions, if they dig into my past and my mental health records and my discharge paperwork, I could lose her too." Paul hadn't considered that. "You think someone would challenge your custody? I think the world doesn't look kindly on mentally unstable janitors raising children alone. I think if the wrong social worker asks the wrong questions, I could end up in court trying to prove I'm fit to be a father. And I can't risk that. I won't." "So you're willing to let the Harlow 7 go to market with a fatal flaw?" Henry's face twisted with pain. "I sent anonymous warnings." "I tried. They were ignored. Because you have no credibility as an anonymous source. But as Dr. Henry Brooks, cardiac surgeon, your voice would matter. I'm not Dr. Brooks anymore. That person died 7 years ago in a hospital hallway." "No," Paul said firmly. "That person is standing in front of me right now, terrified but still caring about patients he'll never meet. Still trying to save lives, even when it costs him everything. That's who you are, Henry. You just forgot for a while." Henry turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the sink. "Even if I wanted to help, and I'm not saying I do, I don't have the credentials. No license, no hospital privileges, no standing with the FDA. Anything I say would be dismissed. Not if I back you up. Not if Susan backs you up. We have credentials. We have standing. We can present your analysis under our names, with full attribution. You wouldn't have to be visible. Just useful." Henry's reflection in the mirror looked haunted. "Why are you pushing this?" "Because Richard Harlow is dying. And because you saved his life once, and now he needs someone to save the company he built from making a catastrophic mistake. Someone who understands hearts. Someone who cares about patients more than profits." "Richard is dying?" Henry turned sharply. "Massive stroke 6 months ago. He's in a coma, failing slowly. His heart is severely damaged. He'd need a valve replacement to have any chance of recovery, but he's too weak for surgery. It's—" Paul's voice broke slightly. "It's complicated." Henry's face had gone white. "Does Natalie know?" "She visits him every day. But she doesn't know about you. She doesn't know that the janitor she humiliated is the surgeon who saved her father's life." "Good." "Let's keep it that way." "Henry, no." Henry's voice was firm now. "I'll help with the valve. I'll work with you and Susan to document the flaw and present it properly. But I stay anonymous. Natalie doesn't find out who I am, and when this is over, I go back to being invisible. Those are my terms." Paul studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Agreed. We meet tomorrow night, after hours. My office. Bring everything you know about the valve's failure mechanism." Henry nodded, and Paul left. Alone again, Henry looked at his reflection. A janitor who used to be a doctor, a father who used to be a husband, a man who used to believe he could save the world. Now he'd settle for saving a few lives without losing the only thing that mattered. Emma was already asleep when Henry got home. The FDA demonstration was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning. The auditorium was packed with officials, investors, journalists, and cardiac surgeons from teaching hospitals across the country. Natalie stood backstage, breathing carefully, counting to 4 on the inhale, 8 on the exhale. Her father had taught her that trick. She'd spent the previous 2 days in meetings with the board, defending the Harlow 7 against last-minute concerns that had mysteriously surfaced. Someone, she didn't know who, had submitted a detailed technical analysis of potential stress response failures to the FDA. The analysis was anonymous but sophisticated, written by someone with deep clinical knowledge. The FDA had nearly postponed the demonstration. Natalie had convinced them to proceed, arguing that the concerns were based on theoretical modeling rather than real-world testing. She'd staked her reputation on the valve's safety. Now, standing backstage with her career on the line, she felt the weight of her father's absence like a physical pressure on her chest. "You ready?" Susan Martinez appeared beside her. "Ready as I'll ever be. The valve looks perfect in all our standard simulations. This is going to change everything." Natalie wanted to believe her, but something gnawed at her. The anonymous technical report, the timing of the concerns, the sophistication of the analysis. Someone knew something. Someone was trying to warn her, but she'd chosen to ignore it. The company needed this win. She needed this win. The demonstration began. Susan presented the technical specifications while a live simulation played on the massive screen. The Harlow 7 sat in a clear chamber, connected to a mechanical heart that mimicked human cardiac function. Pressure sensors tracked every measurement. The audience watched, rapt. For 15 minutes, everything was perfect. The valve opened and closed with flawless precision. Pressure gradients were optimal. Flow dynamics were textbook. Then Dr. Robert Yamamoto stood up. He was 72, a legend in cardiac surgery, and his presence at the demonstration was a coup for Harlow Medical Technologies. "May I ask a question?" His voice carried through the auditorium. Natalie felt her stomach tighten. "Of course, Dr. Yamamoto. Have you tested the valve under sustained high-stress conditions? Say, the equivalent of a cardiac event or extreme exercise?" Susan glanced at Natalie, who kept her expression neutral. "We've run standard stress simulations across a range of cardiac conditions. I'd like to see maximum stress, the kind of conditions your patients will actually experience during the moments that matter most. Can you run that now?" The room went silent. Natalie felt every eye turn to her. "Dr. Yamamoto, our testing protocols follow FDA guidelines for—" "I'm not questioning your protocols. I'm asking to see the valve perform under the extreme conditions that prompted someone to submit a detailed failure analysis to the FDA 3 days ago. I read that report. It was compelling. I'd like to see if the concerns are justified." Trapped, Natalie met Susan's eyes across the stage. Susan's face was pale, but she nodded slightly. "Run the high-stress simulation," Natalie said. Susan typed commands into the computer. The mechanical heart's rhythm increased. Pressure climbed. On screen, blood flow velocity accelerated, the arrows showing increasing cardiac stress. For 30 seconds, the valve held. Then, exactly as the anonymous report had predicted, the leaflets began to flutter. Then they failed to close completely. Then Dr. Yamamoto collapsed. The sound was terrible. A heavy thud as the elderly surgeon hit the floor, his head striking the armrest on the way down. His body convulsed once, then went still. People screamed. Surgeons from the audience rushed forward. Someone shouted for a defibrillator. Chaos erupted. Henry was cleaning the third-floor hallway directly above the auditorium when he heard the commotion. He abandoned his mop and ran toward the stairs, some instinct pulling him forward. Emma was supposed to be in the break room, but he'd let her watch the demonstration from the observation gallery. He'd thought it would be educational, safe. Now he burst through the gallery doors and saw chaos below. A man on the floor, doctors crowding around, and Emma, standing at the gallery railing, her face white with terror. "Daddy!" Henry grabbed her shoulders, turning her away from the scene. Stay here. Don't move. Don't look." Then he ran down the stairs to the auditorium floor, his heart pounding. Years of training overriding 7 years of silence. Dr. Yamamoto was unconscious, his face gray. 2 surgeons were starting CPR, but Henry could see immediately that the technique was wrong. Compressions too shallow, rhythm inconsistent, hand placement slightly off-center. Before he could think, Henry was moving, pushing through the crowd. His hands were shaking, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. The panic was rising, the familiar tightness in his chest. But the need was stronger. "You're too shallow," he yelled, his voice cracking with adrenaline. He shoved the young resident aside without ceremony. "Let me." Henry took position over Dr. Yamamoto. He saw his own hands trembling as he placed them on the man's sternum. He squeezed his eyes shut and pushed. The tremor vanished, absorbed by the raw force of the compression. It was pure muscle memory, thousands of hours of training overriding 7 years of fear. He wasn't thinking, he was just doing. "AED!" exclamation mark. "Get the AED!" he shouted, not looking up. "Call a code!" Now. People moved, reacting to the certainty in his actions, even if his voice was ragged with panic. The resident he'd pushed aside stared at him, stunned. The AED arrived. "Clear!" Henry yelled, pulling his hands back. The shock was delivered. The monitor showed V-fib. "No good!" Again. He was back on the chest instantly, compressions hard and fast. He saw Susan with the crash cart. "Epi! 1 milligram now," he gasped, not breaking rhythm. He was exhausted, terrified, his scar aching under his shirt, but his body wouldn't let him stop. He wasn't Dr. Brooks, the commander. He was just Henry, a desperate man acting on an instinct he thought he'd buried. Finally, after 6 minutes that felt like hours, Dr. Yamamoto gasped. His eyes fluttered. Color returned to his face. "We have sinus rhythm," the nurse monitoring the AED announced. Henry sat back on his heels, his hands finally shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Get him on oxygen. Someone needs to call ahead to the cardiac catheterization lab. He's going to need an angiogram within the hour to assess for coronary occlusion." Paramedics burst through the auditorium doors, and Henry stepped aside, letting the professionals take over. As they loaded Yamamoto onto a gurney, preparing to transport him, Henry stood up. His janitor's shirt had torn during the compressions, not completely, but enough that the left side had pulled open at the collar, exposing part of his chest. The scar was visible, jagged, puckered, unmistakable even from a distance. Natalie stood on the stage, her world spinning. She'd just watched her company's flagship product fail catastrophically. She'd watched a man nearly die, and she'd watched their janitor save his life with skills no janitor should possess. Paul Chen stepped forward, his voice shaking but clear enough to carry through the auditorium's stunned silence. "That's a bullet wound." Every eye turned to Henry. "I know that scar," Paul continued, walking closer. "I operated on that wound 7 years ago. Boston Memorial, the shooting in the ER. Henry's face had gone white. His hand moved instinctively to his chest, pulling the torn fabric closed, but it was too late. "You were the surgeon," Paul said. His voice was thick with emotion. "The one who saved Richard Harlow's life while your wife was being killed. The one who took a bullet and survived when you shouldn't have. Dr. Henry Brooks." Someone in the audience gasped. Natalie felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "That's impossible," she whispered. But even as she said it, she was remembering. The photograph in her father's office, the story he'd told her about the surgeon who'd stayed calm during chaos, who'd finished an operation while people were dying around him. The surgeon who'd refused a medal and then vanished. Dr. Brooks was discharged from his residency, someone said. He was declared mentally unfit. "Because he had PTSD, Paul said firmly. "Because he watched his wife die and it broke something in him, but it didn't erase his training. It didn't erase who he was." Henry was backing toward the exit, his face a mask of panic. But Emma appeared in front of him. having climbed down from the gallery. She grabbed his hand. "Daddy, everyone's staring." The word, "Daddy," hit the crowd like a physical force. This wasn't just a surgeon hiding as a janitor. This was a father. Natalie's voice cut through the murmurs. "You sent the warnings." About the valve, the technical analysis. It was you. Henry met her eyes across the chaos. His expression was equal parts defiance and resignation. "Yes. And we ignored you." "I ignored you." "Yes. The valve failed exactly as you predicted." "Yes." Natalie looked at the screen, where the Harlow 7's catastrophic failure was still displayed. She looked at the paramedics loading Dr. Yamamoto, who would have died without Henry's intervention. She looked at this man she'd humiliated, who'd saved a life while she'd been defending a device that could have ended thousands. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Henry's laugh was bitter. "When would that conversation have happened? When you were mocking my daughter? When you were explaining that I'd only ever clean up after important people? Or maybe after I told you? When you were deciding whether a mentally unstable janitor with PTSD should be allowed around your employees?" The words hit like slaps. Natalie flinched with each one. "I deserve that," she said quietly. "You deserved worse, but I'm too tired for worse." Susan stepped forward. "Henry, the valve. Can you help us fix it?" "I already told you how to fix it. You ignored me. Because we didn't know who you were. Because an anonymous warning doesn't carry weight with the FDA. But now everyone knows I'm a washed-up surgeon with a breakdown in his history. That'll really help your credibility." "You just saved a man's life in front of 50 witnesses," Paul said. "You demonstrated clinical skills that most practicing surgeons would struggle to match. Your history doesn't erase that." Henry shook his head. "I'm not getting involved. I did what I could. I warned you. The rest is your problem." He took Emma's hand and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted, people staring at him with mixtures of shock, recognition, and something that might have been respect. Natalie called after him, "My father is dying." Henry stopped but didn't turn around. "He's in a coma." "His heart is failing. He needs the valve replacement he should have gotten 7 years ago, but he's too weak for surgery. The neurosurgeon says he probably won't survive." Her voice broke. "You saved his life once. Please, I know I have no right to ask. I know I was cruel to you and your daughter. But he's all I have, and if anyone can save him, it's you." Henry's shoulders were rigid. Emma looked up at him, her small face confused and frightened. "Daddy?" she whispered. Henry closed his eyes. When he opened them, he turned to face Natalie across the auditorium. "I can't operate. My hands shake. I have panic attacks. The last time I tried to do surgery, I nearly killed someone. I'm not safe in an OR anymore." "Your hands were shaking, but you performed flawless CPR?" Susan said. "The moment you started compressions, the tremor stopped. That wasn't panic. That was focus. CPR is different. You gave precise orders, administered medication, made split-second clinical decisions. That's not muscle memory. That's active medical judgment." Henry shook his head, but Paul could see the conflict in his face. "What if you had support?" Paul asked. "A full team, backup surgeon standing by, the best anesthesiologist in the state, everything you need to feel safe." "It's not about feeling safe. It's about being competent, and I'm not anymore." Emma tugged on his hand. "Daddy, is Mr. Harlow the man you saved when Mommy died?" Henry looked down at his daughter, and his expression crumbled. "Yeah, baby. And now he's sick, very sick. Would Mommy want you to help him?" The question broke something in Henry's chest. He thought about Grace in her scrubs, always taking the hardest cases, always volunteering for extra shifts. She'd believed medicine was a calling, not a choice. She'd believed you helped people especially when it was hard, especially when it cost you. "Yeah," Henry whispered. "She would." Emma hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. "Then I think you should try. Even if you're scared, because being brave means doing things even when they're scary." Henry held his daughter and felt tears on his face. Around them, the auditorium had gone completely silent, 50 people witnessing a father and daughter navigate an impossible choice. Finally, Henry looked up at Natalie. "I want to see his medical records. All of them. Imaging, lab values, surgical history, everything. And I want to consult with his current care team. No promises. I'll review the case and tell you if I think surgery is even viable." "Thank you," Natalie whispered. "Don't thank me yet." There's a good chance the answer is no. But even as he said it, Henry felt something shifting inside him. Something he'd thought was dead waking up. Not hope exactly, but possibility. They met in Paul's office 2 hours later. Henry, Paul, Susan, and Richard Harlow's neurosurgeon, Dr. Kathy Morrison. Richard's complete medical file was spread across the conference table. Henry studied the imaging scans with an intensity that made his hands tremble. Not from fear, from focus. "The stroke damaged his left ventricle significantly," he said, tracing his finger across the cardiac MRI. "You can see the wall motion abnormalities here and here. His ejection fraction is probably around 25%. 23, Kathy confirmed. "And you want to do a valve replacement on a heart that's barely functioning at baseline. His current valve is severely stenotic. It's contributing to his heart failure. If we can replace it, theoretically his cardiac function should improve. But the surgery itself requires stopping the heart, putting him on bypass, and hoping his damaged myocardium can be restarted after. The stress could cause complete cardiac failure." "Yes." Henry sat back, rubbing his face. "What's his current neurological status?" "Declining. Intracranial pressure is increasing despite medication. He needs a shunt, but we can't do the brain surgery without addressing the heart. It's a death sentence either way." Henry's voice was flat. Silence fell over the room. "Unless," Henry said slowly, "we do both procedures simultaneously." Everyone stared at him. "You want to operate on his brain and his heart at the same time?" Kathy's voice was incredulous. "I want to minimize the number of times we have to put him under anesthesia and stress his body. If we're going to crack his chest for the valve, we can place the shunt at the same time. 2 teams working in parallel. It doubles the complexity, but it halves the physiological stress." "That's insane," Susan said. "That's creative," Paul corrected. "Henry, have you done this before?" "Once, 7 years ago. Trauma patient with both cardiac and neurological injuries. It worked. Once isn't a pattern. Once is more experience than you'll get anywhere else." Henry's eyes met Paul's. "You asked me to consult. This is my consultation. It's high risk, but it's his best chance. Maybe his only chance." Kathy was already pulling up surgical scheduling software. "We'd need both ORS available simultaneously, with full teams for each procedure. The coordination would be difficult, but not impossible," Henry said. "I've seen it done. The key is communication between teams and a shared anesthesiologist who can manage both surgical fields." "You're describing yourself as the cardiac surgeon," Paul said quietly. Henry's jaw tightened. "I'm describing a theoretical approach. Whether I'm capable of executing it is a different question. Let me ask you directly. Can you do this surgery?" The room held its breath. Henry looked at his hands. They were shaking again. The tremor he'd learned to hide. 7 years of fear and failure written in that slight movement. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know that if I don't try, Richard Harlow will die. And I know that I've already lost everyone I loved watching people die that I could have saved. I don't think I can do that again." "That's not a yes," Kathy said. "It's all I've got." Paul stood up. "Then let's make it work. We'll assemble the best team available. We'll have backup surgeons scrubbed and ready. We'll give you every advantage possible." "When?" Henry asked. "Richard's declining fast. We have 48 hours, maybe less." Henry nodded slowly. "Then we operate tomorrow night. That gives me time to review his case, plan the procedure, and—" He stopped, his voice catching. "And say goodbye to Emma, just in case." "In case of what?" Susan asked. "In case I fail." "In case this breaks me again." in case I lose my nerve in the OR and your backup team has to take over. Emma deserves to know that might happen." Natalie appeared in the doorway. No one had noticed her standing there. "She also deserves to know that you're trying," Natalie said. "That when everyone else said it was impossible, you said maybe. That's not failure. That's courage." Henry looked at the woman who'd humiliated him 72 hours ago and saw something different now. Not an enemy, not even really a friend. Just another person drowning in circumstances beyond their control, trying to save someone they loved. "Your father is lucky to have you," Henry said. "He'd be luckier if I'd listened to you earlier. We all have regrets. The only thing that matters is what we do next." Natalie nodded. "What do you need from me?" "Stay with him. Talk to him. Let him know you're there. Surgical outcomes for coma patients improve when they have emotional support preoperatively. It sounds like pseudoscience, but the data supports it. I'll be there all night." "Good." Henry stood, gathering the medical files. "And Natalie, I can't promise this will work. I can only promise I'll try. That has to be enough." "It is," she said. "More than enough." That night, Henry sat on Emma's bed, watching her sleep. She'd been so brave today, standing in front of that auditorium full of strangers, holding his hand while his secret unraveled. She deserved better than a father who was terrified of his own competence, but she also deserved a father who tried. "Daddy," her voice was sleepy. "You okay?" "Yeah, baby. Just thinking. About the surgery tomorrow? How did you know about that?" "I heard Dr. Chen talking. You're going to save Mr. Harlow, right?" Henry's throat tightened. "I'm going to try." "Will it be scary?" "Very scary." "Will you be able to do it, even with your shaky hands?" The question was so innocent, so direct. Emma had noticed what he'd tried so hard to hide. "I don't know, baby. My hands shake when I get scared, and I've been scared for a really long time." "Since Mommy died?" "Yeah." Emma sat up, her small face serious in the dim light. "Daddy, you know what Mommy would say?" "What?" "She'd say that being scared just means you care, and caring is what makes you a good doctor." Henry felt tears on his face. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm almost 7. I'm practically grown up." He laughed despite everything. "That's right." "You are?" Emma hugged him tight. "I'll be brave tomorrow if you'll be brave." "Deal." "And Daddy, even if your hands shake, I think you'll do it, because you love helping people. It's who you are." Henry held his daughter and felt something inside him shift. Not healing. That would take longer. But settling. Like bones finding their proper alignment after years of being misplaced. Maybe she was right. Maybe loving people was enough. Maybe caring was its own kind of competence. He'd find out tomorrow. The surgery was scheduled for 7 p.m. Henry spent the day reviewing Richard's case until he could close his eyes and see every vessel, every structure, every potential complication. Paul worked beside him, offering observations, asking questions that forced Henry to think through every step. At 5 p.m., Natalie found Henry in the surgical prep area. "Can I show you something?" she asked. She led him to Richard's room. The old man lay still, his chest rising and falling with the ventilator's rhythm. Natalie sat beside the bed, taking her father's hand. "Dad, there's someone here I want you to meet." "Well, meet again." She looked at Henry. "Tell him who you are." Henry moved closer to the bed, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. "Mr. Harlow, I'm Henry Brooks. We met 7 years ago in very different circumstances. You probably don't remember. You were unconscious for most of it. But I was the surgeon who operated on you at Boston Memorial. During the shooting, no response. Just the steady beep of monitors. Your daughter asked me to help you again. To be honest, I'm terrified. I haven't done surgery in 7 years. My hands shake. I have nightmares. I'm probably going to mess this up in 1,000 ways." Henry's voice cracked. "But I'm going to try. Because your daughter loves you, and because my wife would have wanted me to try." And because you stood in a trauma bay 7 years ago and refused to let the doctors give up on me when I was bleeding out on their table." Natalie's head snapped up. "What? You didn't know?" "After the shooter wounded me, I started hemorrhaging. Internal bleeding they'd missed initially. The trauma team was overwhelmed, multiple casualties, limited resources. They triaged me as a lost cause. They were focusing on more viable patients. Your father was recovering in the ICU, barely conscious himself, but he heard them talking. He asked who the surgeon was who'd saved him. They told him Dr. Brooks. Then they mentioned I'd also been shot and probably wouldn't make it. He couldn't stand up. He didn't have to. He just told the hospital administrator that if I died, he'd pull every dollar of his funding and sue them into oblivion. They had a new surgical team on me in 10 minutes. He saved my life from his hospital bed." Natalie was crying now. "He never told me." "He wouldn't. He was that kind of man. Someone who did the right thing without needing credit." "Like you." Henry shook his head. "I'm not doing this for credit. I'm doing it because I owe him and because your daughter—" He stopped, corrected himself. "Because you deserve to have your father back." He left Natalie alone with Richard and went to scrub in. The OR was prepared with meticulous precision. 2 surgical teams, 1 cardiac, 1 neurosurgery, stood ready. Henry had Paul across the table from him, with Susan managing the heart-lung bypass machine. Kathy Morrison's neuro team was positioned at Richard's head, ready to place the shunt once Henry gave them clearance. Emma was in the waiting room with Mrs. Chen, coloring in her notebook to manage her anxiety. Natalie sat beside them, having been gently but firmly excluded from the OR. Henry stood at the scrub sink, watching his hands under the water. They were shaking. Paul appeared beside him. "You ready?" "No." "Good. Confidence is dangerous in surgery. Respect for the complexity is what keeps patients alive. What if I freeze? Then I'll take over, but you won't freeze. How do you know? Because I watched you save Dr. Yamamoto's life. Despite your panic. Because I've read your surgical history. You've never lost a patient in the OR. Because you're Dr. Henry Brooks, and that person doesn't just disappear." Henry dried his hands with a sterile towel, watching the tremor persist, even after the motion stopped. "Grace believed in me," he said quietly, "even when I didn't believe in myself. I wish she could see this. Maybe she can." Henry pulled on his surgical gloves, and the tremor stopped. Not completely, but enough. He pushed through the OR doors. Richard Harlow lay draped on the table, his chest already prepped and painted with antiseptic. The anesthesiologist, Dr. James Park, nodded from his position at the head of the bed. "He's stable." "Ready when you are." Henry took his position at the table. Paul stood across from him. Susan was at the bypass machine. Kathy and her team waited nearby, instruments ready. "Scalpel," Henry said. The instrument touched his palm, and suddenly he was back. Not in the way of trauma or flashbacks, but in the way of coming home. His hands knew what to do. His mind knew how to think. The operating room, which had been a place of terror for 7 years, was suddenly just a place where he worked. He made the first incision. The surgery took 9 hours. Opening Richard's chest revealed a heart that was more damaged than the imaging had suggested. Scarred tissue, weakened muscle, valves barely functioning. Henry worked with painstaking precision, every movement deliberate, every decision weighed. "We've got significant calcification on the valve leaflets," he said. "Going to need to be careful with removal to avoid embolism." Paul handled retraction, while Henry carefully dissected the damaged valve free. Twice they hit unexpected bleeding. Twice Henry controlled it with steady hands and calm commands. "Bypass," he said, and Susan activated the heart-lung machine, taking over Richard's circulation. With the heart stopped and empty, Henry could work unobstructed. The new valve went in perfectly, each suture placed with the precision of someone who'd done this procedure hundreds of times. "Kathy, you're clear to start," Henry said. "We've got stable bypass. You have a 40-minute window." The neurosurgery team moved into position, working at Richard's head while Henry continued cardiac reconstruction. 2 operations happening simultaneously, coordinated through constant communication. At hour 6, they hit the first major complication. Richard's heart wouldn't restart. "Increase the pacing," Henry said, his voice tight, "and give me the paddles." Internal defibrillation, shocking the heart directly, was terrifying but sometimes necessary. Henry positioned the paddles around Richard's heart, making eye contact with Paul. Clear. The shock made Richard's entire body jerk. On the monitor, chaos. Then nothing. Then, "We have sinus rhythm," James announced. Henry exhaled, his hands shaking again now. Paul reached across the table, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing great. Keep going." At hour 8, Kathy finished the shunt placement. Richard's intracranial pressure immediately began to drop. "We're good here," she said. "It's all yours now, Henry." Henry closed Richard's chest with meticulous care, placing every wire and suture perfectly. When the final stitch was complete, he stepped back. "That's it. He's done." The OR erupted in quiet congratulations. Paul gripped Henry's shoulder. Susan was openly crying. Even James, who'd seen thousands of surgeries, looked impressed. "That was remarkable," he said. "I've never seen such precise work under those conditions." Henry pulled off his gloves, and his hands were shaking violently now, all the adrenaline and fear finally catching up. "I need to sit down," he said. Paul guided him to a stool. Henry put his head between his knees, breathing hard, the weight of what he'd just done crashing down. "Did we really just do that?" he asked. "You did that," Paul corrected. "We just helped." In the waiting room, Natalie stood up the moment Henry pushed through the doors. His scrubs were soaked with sweat, his face pale with exhaustion. "He's alive," Henry said. "The surgery was successful. Both the valve and the shunt are in place and functioning. He's in recovery now." Natalie's legs gave out. Emma and Mrs. Chen caught her, easing her into a chair. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, huge gasping sobs of relief and exhaustion and joy. Emma approached Henry shyly. "Daddy, you did it?" He knelt down, pulling her into a hug. "Yeah, baby, I did it." "Were your hands shaky?" "So shaky. But I did it anyway." "Because you're brave." "Because you made me brave." They held each other while Natalie cried and the medical staff watched. This moment, a father and daughter, a CEO and her unconscious father, a surgeon who'd found himself again, felt somehow bigger than any of them. It felt like healing. Richard Harlow woke up 6 days later. His eyes opened slowly, fighting the sedation, confused by the tubes and machines. A nurse called for Paul, who called for Natalie, who sprinted through the hospital fast enough that security gave up trying to stop her. When she burst into the room, her father's eyes found her immediately. "Natalie," he whispered around the breathing tube. His voice was barely audible, damaged from intubation. She grabbed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Dad. Oh my God, Dad." They removed the tube an hour later. Richard's first clear words were, "What happened?" "You needed surgery, a valve replacement and a brain shunt. You almost died." Natalie's voice broke. "But someone saved you." "Who?" "Dr. Henry Brooks." Richard's eyes widened. "Brooks? Henry Brooks? He's alive?" "Yes, and he's here. He's been here the whole time." "Where?" Paul brought Henry in 30 minutes later. He'd cleaned up but still wore his janitor's uniform. It was all he had. When Richard saw him, tears filled the old man's eyes. "You," he whispered. Henry approached the bed slowly. "Mr. Harlow, you saved my life again. Just evening the score, you saved mine once too." "I did." "Boston Memorial, you threatened to sue the trauma team if they let me die." "I never got to say thank you." Richard shook his head weakly, wincing at the pain. "I didn't know it was you. I just knew they were giving up on someone who'd saved my life. Couldn't let that stand." "Well, I'm returning the favor. We're even now." Richard's hand reached out shakily. Henry took it. "Thank you," Richard said, "for coming back, for being here when I needed you, for not letting what happened break you permanently." "I did break," Henry said quietly. "I'm still broken in a lot of ways. I just learned that broken things can still function. They're just different." "That's not broken. That's evolved." They talked for a while longer, Richard growing tired quickly. Natalie sat in the corner, watching this man who'd been invisible to her reveal himself as the hero who'd saved everything she loved. When Henry stood to leave, Richard caught his hand again. "Stay," he said. "Work here. Be who you are. We need you." "I appreciate that, but I'm serious. This company needs someone who understands that medicine is about patients, not profits. Someone with ethics and expertise. Someone who will call us out when we're wrong." Richard's voice strengthened despite his exhaustion. "Someone like you." Henry looked at Natalie. She nodded. "We messed up with the Harlow 7, she said. "We prioritized speed over safety. We ignored warnings. We need someone to prevent that from happening again, and there's no one better qualified than you. I don't have a medical license. You don't need one for an ethics and safety oversight role. You'd review all our devices, ensure proper testing, act as patient advocate. We'd pay you appropriately, more than appropriately, and provide Emma's health insurance and education funding." Henry's throat was tight. "I don't know." "Think about it," Richard said. "But Henry, you belong in medicine. Maybe not in the OR, maybe not in the traditional sense, but you belong here, using your knowledge to save lives. Don't let one tragedy 7 years ago erase a lifetime of purpose." Emma appeared in the doorway, having been brought up by Mrs. Chen. She ran to Henry, hugging his leg. "Is Mr. Harlow okay?" she asked. "He's going to be fine, baby." She looked at Richard, shy but curious. "My daddy saved you." "He did. Your daddy is a hero." "I know. He's always been my hero." Richard smiled, his eyes on Henry. "Then you're a lucky man, Dr. Brooks." "The luckiest," Henry agreed. 3 months later, Henry stood in the new medical ethics wing of Harlow Medical Technologies, watching through the observation window as a surgical team implanted the redesigned Harlow 7 valve. The new version had been completely rebuilt based on Henry's recommendations, with months of additional stress testing. It had passed every simulation, every real-world scenario, every skeptical reviewer's scrutiny. It was safe. It was ready. It was right. Emma stood beside him, now 7 years old, her notebook full of increasingly sophisticated anatomical drawings. "Daddy, when I'm a doctor, will I work here?" "If you want to. You can work anywhere. I want to work where you work, so we can help people together." Henry's chest was tight with emotion. "I'd like that." Natalie appeared beside them. Over the past 3 months, she'd transformed, stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic vision, learning to listen more than she spoke, becoming the kind of leader her father had always believed she could be. She and Henry had developed an unlikely friendship built on mutual respect and shared trauma. "The surgery's going perfectly," she said. "It is. This valve will save thousands of lives because you refused to stay silent, because you were brave enough to speak up even when no one was listening. You were brave enough to listen when it mattered." They stood together, watching the surgery, watching the future take shape. Below them, in Richard's office, the old man sat at his desk for the first time since his stroke. He was thinner, moved slower, but his mind was sharp. He was drafting a policy that would require independent ethics review for all medical devices, permanently institutionalizing Henry's role. In the break room where Henry used to mop floors, a new generation of medical students gathered for a seminar on ethical device development, taught by Dr. Henry Brooks, not a licensed surgeon anymore, but something perhaps more important, a voice of conscience in an industry that desperately needed one. The scar on Henry's chest would never fade, but it had become something different now. Not a mark of what he'd lost, but a reminder of what he'd survived, of what grace had taught him, of the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. Emma tugged on his hand. Daddy, can we get ice cream after work? Absolutely. Can Miss Natalie come? Henry glanced at Natalie, who smiled. If she wants to. I'd love to, Natalie said. They walked out of the medical wing together, past the labs where people work to save lives, past the memorial plaque for Grace Brooks that Henry had finally allowed them to install. Grace Brooks, RN. She believed medicine was a calling. Past the future they were building one day at a time. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Emma skipped ahead, her laughter bright and clear in the evening air. Henry watched his daughter and felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Not just hope, peace. He'd been a surgeon. He'd been broken. He'd been invisible. And now he was something new. Something he was still defining, still discovering. But standing there with Emma's laughter in his ears and Natalie's friendship beside him and his wife's memory no longer a weight, but a light guiding him forward, Henry thought maybe he was simply himself. Scarred, surviving. Still here. And for the first time in 7 years, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything.